The whip cracked across the stone floor an inch from Lyra Voss's bare feet, and she did not flinch, because flinching only made them laugh harder. "Pick it up," snarled the woman standing over her, a tall Omega handler named Greta, who had never once used Lyra's real name in 5 years. "You are lucky the Ashmore pack even lets you breathe their air, girl. Pick up the tray before I make you regret being born." Lyra gathered the shattered pieces of porcelain from the floor, her fingers trembling not from fear, but from exhaustion. She had been awake since before dawn, scrubbing floors, hauling water, and now serving food to guests who would not look at her twice, unless it was to sneer. She was 23 years old, though the hollows under her eyes made her look older, and the faint silver scar along her collarbone told a story she never spoke of to anyone. She was an Omega. In the world of the 5 packs, that word alone decided everything about a person's life before they ever had the chance to choose it themselves. Omegas were the lowest rank in the hierarchy of wolves, expected to serve, to bow, to disappear into the background of every room. Lyra had been born into the Ashmore pack, but she had never once felt like she belonged to it. Her parents had died when she was young, and the pack elders decided a parentless Omega girl was worth less than the dirt beneath the kennels. "Move faster!" Greta hissed, grabbing Lyra's arm hard enough to bruise. "The convoy leaves within the hour. Blackthorn Kingdom does not wait for servants who cannot keep pace." Today was the day of the Grand Tribute, an ancient tradition where every pack and kingdom in the region sent envoys, gifts, and workers to the capital of Blackthorn to renew old alliances. Lyra was not going as a guest. She was going as cargo, one of a dozen servants dragged along to carry crates, serve wine, and vanish into corners while lords and ladies postured for power. She climbed into the back of the wagon with the other servants, none of whom spoke to her. She had long since stopped expecting conversation. The wagon rattled down the dirt road for hours, past fields and forests, until the towering black spires of Blackthorn Castle rose against the horizon, like blades cutting into the sky. Even from a distance, the castle radiated a kind of cold, ancient power that made her stomach tighten. Blackthorn was ruled by King Draven Ashgrave, a name spoken across every territory with a mixture of fear and awe. He was known as the Alpha King who had never lost a battle, never shown mercy to a traitor, and never taken a mate, despite the desperate maneuvering of noble families hoping to bind their daughters to his throne. Some called him Ruthless, others called him something worse. Lyra had never seen him, and she hoped, quietly, that she never would. Servants who caught the eye of powerful men rarely had good stories to tell afterward. The wagon rolled through the towering iron gates, and Lyra was ushered inside with the other workers, handed a tray of polished silver, and told to remain silent, invisible, and useful. The great hall of Blackthorn Castle was unlike anything she had ever seen. Marble floors gleamed under the light of 100 candles. Banners bearing the sigil of a black wolf, snarling beneath a crown hung from the vaulted ceiling. Nobles in fine silks mingled and laughed, their voices echoing off the stone, while Omega servants like her moved between them like ghosts. For hours, Lyra carried trays, refilled goblets, and kept her eyes low. Her feet ached, her arms ached. But she had learned long ago that pain was simply a companion she carried everywhere, one that never truly left. It was during a brief lull, when the nobles had moved to the outer terrace to watch fireworks celebrating the tribute, that Greta shoved a heavy crate into Lyra's arms and pointed down a narrow corridor. "Take this to the West Wing storage, and do not dawdle." Lyra nodded and slipped away from the noise and light of the hall, grateful, for a moment, to be away from the crowd. The corridor was dim, lit only by torches spaced far apart, and the crate in her arms grew heavier with every step. She passed door after door, searching for the storage room Greta had described, until she found herself standing before a large wooden door, carved with symbols she did not recognize, ancient and worn smooth by time. She should have turned back. She would think about that decision many times over the following days, wondering what would have happened if she had simply retraced her steps and asked someone for directions instead. But her arms were tired, the crate was heavy, and the door was slightly ajar, spilling a strange golden light into the corridor. Curiosity, that old dangerous companion, pulled her forward. She set the crate down gently and pushed the door open wider. The room beyond was small but grand, lined with shelves of ancient artifacts, weapons mounted on the walls, and tapestries so old Their colors had faded into ghostly pastels. In the center of the room, resting on a pedestal of black stone, sat a crown. It was unlike any crown Lyra had ever imagined. Wrought from a metal that seemed to shift between silver and gold, depending on how the light struck it, the crown was lined with small dark stones that pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat trapped inside glass. Intricate patterns swirled across its surface, patterns that seemed to move if she stared too long. She had heard whispers about this room from the other servants on the journey. Hushed stories passed between them when the guards were not listening. They called it the Chamber of the Cursed Crown, the Crown of Valeth, said to have been forged centuries ago for a bloodline that no longer existed. Legends claimed the crown had been cursed by a dying sorceress, that anyone unworthy who dared touch it would be burned to ash where they stood. The current king kept it locked away, not as a treasure to display, but as a warning, a relic of a war fought and won, long before he was born. Lyra knew she should step back. She knew every rule of her position told her to close the door, retrieve her crate, and never speak of what she had seen. But something about the crown called to her in a way she could not explain. A pull she felt not in her mind but somewhere deeper, in the marrow of her bones. She told herself she only wanted a closer look, just one look, and then she would leave. Her feet carried her across the room before she had fully decided to move. The candlelight flickered, though there was no draft to explain it. The dark stones set into the crown seemed to brighten as she approached, as though recognizing something in her, though that thought felt foolish even as it crossed her mind. She stood before the pedestal, staring down at the crown, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain someone would hear it through the walls. She thought of everything the elders in Ashmore had ever told her about her own worthlessness, the years of being told she was nothing, less than nothing, unworthy of even basic kindness. She thought about how easy it would be to walk away now, to protect the small, fragile dignity she had left. And then, before she could stop herself, she reached out and touched the crown. For one terrifying heartbeat, nothing happened, and she almost laughed at her own foolishness, at the absurdity of believing, even for a moment, that a piece of metal could hold any power over her fate. Then the crown began to glow. It started as a faint shimmer beneath her fingertips, warm rather than burning, gentle rather than violent. The golden light spread outward from the point of contact, racing across the intricate patterns until the entire crown blazed with brilliant, impossible light. Lyra gasped and tried to pull her hand away, but her fingers would not obey her. The light climbed up her arm, wrapping around her skin like ribbons of liquid gold, and for a moment, the pain and exhaustion and years of quiet suffering seemed to lift from her shoulders entirely, replaced by something she had never felt before. Power, belonging, recognition. Somewhere deep in the castle, an alarm began to ring, ancient bells that had not sounded in a generation, their tone low and resonant, carrying through stone walls that had stood for centuries. The light around Lyra's arm pulsed once more, and then, as suddenly as it had begun, it settled, sinking into her skin, until nothing remained but a faint golden shimmer beneath the surface, like a tattoo made of starlight. The crown itself dimmed, though it continued to pulse gently, as though it, too, were breathing. Lyra stood frozen, staring at her own hand in disbelief, her mind racing to make sense of what had just happened. She was not burned. She was not dead. She felt, if anything, more alive than she had in years. Heavy footsteps thundered down the corridor outside, too many to count, moving with the kind of urgency that made her blood run cold. She turned toward the door just as it was flung open with such force that it cracked against the stone wall behind it. A man stood in the doorway, and every instinct in Lyra's body screamed at her to look away, to bow her head, to make herself small and invisible as she had been trained to do her entire life. But she could not look away. She had never seen anyone like him before. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in dark battle leathers despite the celebration happening elsewhere in the castle, as though he had been ready for war the entire evening. His hair was black as a raven's wing, his jaw sharp enough to cut glass, and his eyes, when they found hers, were a shade of amber so intense they seemed to glow in the dim torchlight. Power radiated from him in waves, an almost physical pressure that pressed against her skin, and she understood, with absolute certainty, exactly who he was. King Draven Ashgrave. His eyes moved from her face to the crown on the pedestal, and back to her again, and for a moment, his expression was unreadable, a mask of controlled fury that made the guards behind him take an involuntary step back. He crossed the room in 3 long strides, closing the distance between them faster than she could react. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice low and dangerous, carrying an authority that made the very air in the room feel heavier. "And what have you done?" Lyra's throat closed. Every survival instinct she had ever developed told her to fall to her knees, to beg forgiveness, to explain that she had wandered in by accident and touched nothing on purpose. But before she could form a single word, the king went suddenly, completely still. His nostrils flared, and something shifted in his expression, the fury draining away, replaced by an intensity that was somehow far more unsettling. He leaned closer, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from him, close enough that she forgot, for one terrifying moment, how to breathe. "Say that again," he murmured, though she had not said anything at all. "Tell me your name." "Lyra," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Lyra Voss." The guards behind him exchanged uneasy glances, clearly sensing the shift in their king's demeanor, without understanding its cause. Draven's amber eyes never left her face, searching, cataloging every detail, as though he were trying to solve a puzzle that had haunted him for years. "The crown chose you," he said, and it was not a question. "It has not glowed for anyone in 3 generations. It burns every hand that is not meant to wear it." "I did not mean to touch it," Lyra said quickly, fear finally breaking through her shock. "I was only looking. I swear. I did not intend any disrespect. Please." "Be silent," Draven said, though there was no cruelty in the command, only a kind of stunned distraction, as though he were speaking to himself as much as to her. He reached out, and for one wild moment she thought he meant to strike her, the way so many others in her life had struck her for far smaller offenses. Instead, his fingers closed gently around her wrist, turning her arm to examine the faint golden shimmer still visible beneath her skin. The moment his skin touched hers, something passed between them, an invisible current that made them both go rigid. Lyra felt it settle into her chest, like a key finally turning in a lock that had been sealed her entire life. Draven's breath caught audibly, and the guards around him shifted uncomfortably, clearly sensing that something profound had just occurred, even if they could not name it. "Impossible," Draven whispered, though the word carried no denial in it, only disbelief. He looked at her again, differently this time, as though seeing her for the first time as something other than a stranger who had trespassed into a forbidden chamber. "Your Majesty," one of the guards said carefully, "shall we take her to the dungeons for questioning?" The word dungeons sent a fresh wave of terror through Lyra, and she instinctively pulled back, though Draven's grip on her wrist did not loosen. If anything, it tightened slightly, not painfully, but with a kind of possessive certainty that confused her even more than everything else that had happened in the last few minutes. "No," Draven said, his voice carrying an edge of finality that silenced every guard in the room instantly. He turned to face them fully, still holding her wrist, as though he had already decided he would not release her. "No one touches her. No one questions her. No one so much as looks at her without my permission." The guards exchanged startled glances, and even Lyra could see the confusion rippling through them, though none dared question their king directly. "She trespassed into the royal chamber, Your Majesty," one guard finally ventured, choosing his words with obvious caution. "The crown has always been forbidden to." "She is not a trespasser," Draven interrupted, his voice low and absolute. "She is my mate." The words landed in the room like a thunderclap. Lyra's mind went blank with shock, certain she had misheard him, certain this was some elaborate cruelty designed to humiliate her before the guards dragged her away to be punished. Mates were sacred bonds among wolves, chosen not by will but by fate itself, recognized through scent and instinct in a single undeniable moment. She had heard stories of kings and alphas rejecting omegas the moment they discovered a mate bond, disgusted by the idea of binding themselves to the lowest rank in their society. She had never, not once, imagined the opposite could be true. "Your Majesty," the guard tried again, clearly struggling to reconcile the scene before him. "She is an Omega servant from Ashmore. She cannot possibly be." "I did not ask for your opinion," Draven said, and though his voice did not rise, Something in his tone made the guard immediately fall silent and bow his head. Draven turned back to Lyra, and for the first time since he had entered the room, his expression softened, just slightly, into something that almost resembled wonder. "You touched the crown of my bloodline," he said quietly, "and it did not burn you. It chose you, and the moment I caught your scent, my wolf recognized something I have been waiting for since the day I was born." He paused, studying her face, as though searching for some sign that she understood the weight of what he was saying. "You are my fated mate, Lyra Voss. Whatever you were before tonight, whatever rank or title the world assigned to you, it ends now." Lyra stared up at him, her heart hammering, her mind spinning with 1,000 questions she did not know how to voice. Somewhere behind the shock and disbelief, a small, fragile part of her, the part that had spent years believing she was worth nothing at all, began to wonder if perhaps, for the first time in her life, everything was about to change. Draven released her wrist, only to offer his hand instead, palm open, waiting. "Come with me," he said. "You are no longer a servant in this castle. From this moment forward, you are under my protection, and anyone who challenges that will answer to me directly." Lyra looked down at his outstretched hand, then up at the crown still glowing faintly on its pedestal, then back at the guards, who watched with expressions caught somewhere between disbelief and fear. Every instinct told her this could not be real, that she would wake up tomorrow back in the servants' quarters with bruises on her arms, and no memory of a golden light or a king's gentle grip on her wrist. But the warmth still pulsed beneath her skin, steady and undeniable, and slowly, hesitantly, she placed her hand in his. The moment their palms met, the ancient bells in the castle finally fell silent, as though the entire kingdom itself had been holding its breath, waiting for her answer. The corridor outside the chamber had gone completely silent by the time Draven led Lyra away from the guards, his hand still wrapped around hers as though he feared she might vanish the moment he let go. She walked beside him in a daze, her bare feet cold against the stone floor, her mind unable to process the last few minutes with any clarity. "Where are we going?" she finally asked, her voice small in the vast emptiness of the castle halls. "Somewhere quiet," Draven said. "You have questions. I intend to answer them." He led her up a curving staircase, and through a set of heavy doors, into what she quickly realized was his private study, a room lined with books, maps, and weapons that told the story of a man who had spent far more time at war than at rest. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting warm light across the room, and for the first time all evening, Lyra felt herself begin to breathe normally again. Draven gestured to a chair near the fire, and she sat, though every muscle in her body remained tense, prepared for this strange kindness to reveal itself as some kind of trap. He remained standing, watching her with an intensity she still could not fully understand, before finally speaking. "You know nothing of the crown," he said. It was not a question. "Only stories," Lyra admitted. "The other servants said it was cursed, that it burns anyone who is not worthy to wear it." "That is what most people believe," Draven said. "It is partly true. The crown was forged for the bloodline of Valeth, an ancient royal line that ruled this land long before my ancestors claimed the throne through conquest. When the Valeth line fell, the crown was sealed away, cursed by the last sorceress of that bloodline, to reject anyone who was not born of true Valeth blood. For 3 generations, no one has touched it without being burned. Some have lost their hands entirely." Lyra's stomach turned, but it did not burn me. "No," Draven said quietly. "It did not." "What does that mean?" He studied her for a long moment, as though weighing how much truth she could bear in a single night. "It means the crown recognized something in you that no one, including you, has ever known. It means you may carry blood from the Valeth line, blood that was thought to be extinct." Lyra let out a short, disbelieving laugh, though there was no humor in it. "That is not possible. I am an orphan from Ashmore. My parents were servants. I have no royal blood in me, Your Majesty. I promise you that." "I am not accusing you of lying," Draven said, his tone gentler than she expected. "I am telling you what the crown itself decided, and the crown does not make mistakes. Whatever your parents told you, or did not tell you, the truth may be buried somewhere you have never thought to look." Lyra fell silent, her mind spinning through fragmented memories of her childhood, memories that had always felt incomplete, as though pieces of her own history had been deliberately hidden from her. She had never known much about her parents beyond their names and the fact that they had died in an accident when she was very young. The pack elders had never encouraged questions. "There is something else," Draven continued, drawing her attention back to him. "When I entered that chamber and caught your scent, my wolf reacted in a way it has never reacted before. Every alpha is born with the instinct to recognize a fated mate, a bond chosen not by choice but by nature itself. I have met countless women in my life, daughters of nobles, warriors, even omegas presented to me as potential matches. None of them stirred anything in me at all." He paused, his amber eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "The moment I saw you, everything changed. My wolf recognized you instantly and completely. That is not something I can explain away, and it is not something I intend to ignore." "But I am an omega," Lyra said, the words tumbling out before she could stop them, years of conditioning making the confession feel almost like a warning she owed him. "Kings do not take omegas as mates. Everyone knows this. I have been told my entire life that omegas exist to serve, not to be claimed by alphas of your rank." Something dark passed across Draven's expression, a flash of anger that made her flinch instinctively, though she quickly realized his anger was not directed at her. "Whoever told you that your rank determines your worth was wrong," he said, his voice hard. "I do not care what title the world has given you. My wolf does not care either. Fate chose you the moment I was born, long before either of us had any say in the matter, and I will not dishonor that bond, because small-minded people believe rank matters more than truth." Lyra did not know how to respond. No one had ever spoken to her with such conviction, such certainty, and part of her wanted desperately to believe him, while another part, hardened by years of disappointment, waited for the cruelty she was certain must be hiding somewhere beneath his words. "What happens now?" she finally asked. "Now," Draven said, "you remain in this castle, under my protection, as my claimed mate. I will announce it formally before the court tomorrow. There will be those who oppose it, nobles who have spent years hoping to bind their daughters to my throne, generals who believe rank should never be crossed. You do not need to fear them. You answer to no one but me." "And if I do not want this?" Lyra asked quietly, though even as she said it, she was not entirely certain the words were true. There was something about him, about the warmth still humming beneath her skin, where the crown's light had touched her, that made the idea of walking away feel almost impossible. Draven's expression flickered, something vulnerable passing briefly across his usually controlled features. "Then I will not force you," he said. "I will not chain you to a bond you do not want, no matter what my wolf demands of me. But I ask that you give me the chance to earn your trust before you decide." It was, Lyra realized, the first time in her entire life that anyone with power over her had asked for her consent rather than simply taking what they wanted. The realization settled into her chest with unexpected weight. "I need time," she said honestly. "This is too much to understand in a single night." "Then you shall have it," Draven said. "But know this, whatever you decide, you will never again be treated as you were treated in Ashmore. That life is over." A soft knock interrupted them, and a woman entered the study, older, with kind eyes, and silver-streaked hair pulled into a neat braid. She wore the deep blue robes of a castle healer, and she bowed respectfully to Draven, before turning her attention to Lyra. "This is Mabel," Draven said. "She oversees the healing wing of the castle, and can be trusted completely. She will see to your comfort tonight, and prepare a proper chamber for you." Mabel's eyes moved over Lyra with quiet assessment, taking in the exhaustion etched into her face, the thinness of her frame, the faint bruises still visible along her arms from years of rough treatment. Something like quiet anger flickered across the healer's expression, though she said nothing of it directly. "Come, dear," Mabel said gently. "Let us get you settled. You look as though you have not had a proper meal, or a full night's rest, in a very long time." Lyra glanced back at Draven, as she rose from her chair, uncertain what to say, uncertain what any of this truly meant, for the life she thought she understood only hours ago. He watched her with an expression she was beginning to recognize as sincere, though she still did not fully trust her own judgment of him. "Sleep well, Lyra Voss," he said quietly. "Tomorrow, everything changes." As Mabel led her from the study and down a different corridor toward the private wing of the castle, Lyra could not shake the feeling that she had crossed some invisible threshold in that dark chamber, one she could never return from. The crown had chosen her, the king had claimed her, and somewhere deep within her chest, beneath years of buried pain and quiet resignation, something that felt dangerously like hope had begun, tentatively, to stir. Mabel showed her to a chamber unlike anything she had ever been permitted to enter before, warm and richly furnished, with a bed piled high with soft blankets, and a fire already crackling in the hearth. A tray of food waited on a small table, more food than Lyra had seen in one place in years. "Eat, dear," Mabel said kindly, noticing the way Lyra's eyes lingered on the tray with barely concealed hunger. "No one is going to take it from you, or punish you for wanting it. Not anymore." Lyra sat slowly, still half expecting some cruel trick, some hidden catch to this sudden, overwhelming kindness. But the food was real, warm, and plentiful, and as she ate, Mabel busied herself preparing a bath, humming softly under her breath, as though caring for exhausted strangers were simply part of an ordinary evening. "You must have many questions," Mabel said eventually, settling into a chair near the fire while Lyra finished her meal. "About the king, about the crown, about what your life will look like from here." "I do not know where to even begin," Lyra admitted. "Then begin with rest," Mabel said gently. "The rest will come in time. I have served this castle for over 30 years, child, and I have never once seen the king look at anyone the way he looked at you tonight. Whatever fear you are carrying, know that you are safe here now." Lyra wanted, desperately, to believe her. As she finally sank into the warm bath Mabel had prepared, feeling the ache of years of hard labor slowly begin to ease from her muscles, she allowed herself, for the first time in longer than she could remember, to imagine a future that did not involve fear, exhaustion, or the constant weight of being told she was worthless. Outside her window, the towers of Blackthorn Castle stood silhouetted against a star-filled sky, and somewhere within those ancient walls, the crown of Valeth continued to glow faintly on its pedestal, as though waiting, patiently, for whatever came next. Morning arrived with a sharp knock and raised voices outside Lyra's chamber door, jolting her from the deepest sleep she had experienced in years. She sat up, disoriented for a moment by the softness of the bed beneath her and the warmth of the fire that had burned steadily through the night, before the memories of the previous evening rushed back all at once. The door opened before she could rise, and Mabel entered quickly, her expression tight with urgency, rather than her usual calm warmth. "Get dressed, dear, quickly," Mabel said, already moving toward a wardrobe that had, impossibly, been filled with fine gowns overnight. "The court has gathered in the great hall. Word has spread of what happened in the chamber last night, and half the nobility is demanding answers before the king has even had his morning meal." Lyra's stomach twisted with fresh anxiety as Mabel helped her into a deep green gown, simple but elegant, nothing like the ragged servant's clothing she had worn her entire life. Looking at her own reflection in the mirror, Lyra almost did not recognize herself, though the exhaustion and weariness in her eyes remained unmistakably her own. "They know already," Lyra said quietly, "about the claiming." "The whole castle knows," Mabel confirmed, fastening the final clasp on the gown. "Word travels faster than fire in a place like this. I will not lie to you, child. Not everyone is pleased." By the time Mabel led her through the winding corridors toward the great hall, Lyra's heart was pounding so violently she feared everyone around her could hear it. 2 guards stood outside the towering doors, and they bowed slightly as she approached, a gesture that still felt entirely foreign and undeserved. Inside, the great hall looked nothing like it had the previous night. Where laughter and celebration had once filled the space, now dozens of nobles stood clustered in tense groups, their voices low but sharp, their eyes turning toward Lyra the moment she stepped through the doors. She felt the weight of their scrutiny like physical pressure, judging her clothing, her posture, her very presence in a room she had only ever entered before to serve wine. At the far end of the hall, seated upon a throne, carved from black stone and gold, sat Draven, his expression carved from granite, giving nothing away. Beside the throne stood a woman Lyra did not recognize, tall and striking, with pale golden hair, arranged in an elaborate style, and eyes the color of ice. She wore a gown of deep crimson, and the way she stood, close to the throne with an air of practiced familiarity, told Lyra immediately that this woman believed she had some claim to the space Lyra now occupied. "Your Majesty," an older man was saying as Lyra approached, his voice tight with barely controlled frustration. "I understand the sacred nature of the mate bond, truly I do, but surely you can see the difficulty this presents. An Omega servant, claimed as queen consort, the other kingdoms will see this as weakness. They will question the strength of Blackthorn's leadership." "General Aldrich," Draven said, his voice cold and even, "are you questioning my judgment before my entire court?" The general, a broad-shouldered man with a graying beard and hardened eyes, straightened under the weight of the king's gaze, but did not back down entirely. "I am questioning the wisdom of announcing a claim before the girl's true identity has even been confirmed, Your Majesty. We know nothing about her beyond a servant's name and an accident in a forbidden chamber." "It was not an accident," Draven said. "The crown chose her. You witnessed the reports yourself." Murmurs rippled through the assembled nobles at this, and Lyra felt every eye in the room turn to her once more, weighing, judging, calculating what her sudden change in status might mean for their own ambitions. The golden-haired woman beside the throne finally spoke, her voice smooth and cutting despite its softness. "Forgive me, Your Majesty, but perhaps the excitement of the discovery has clouded reasonable judgment. Surely a formal investigation into the girl's lineage should precede any public claim. It would hardly do to embarrass the crown by claiming a mate who turns out to be nothing more than an ordinary servant after all." "Lady Seraphine," Draven said, and something in his tone made the woman's confident expression falter slightly. "You forget your place." Seraphine's jaw tightened, though she quickly smoothed her expression into something more diplomatic. "I only wish to protect Your Majesty's interests, as I have always done." Draven's gaze shifted from Seraphine to the crowd at large, and when he rose from his throne, the entire hall fell into immediate silence. He descended the steps slowly, his presence commanding every inch of the space, until he stood directly beside Lyra, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him, even through the tension gripping her chest. "I understand this news is difficult for some of you to accept," Draven said, his voice carrying easily through the silent hall. "I understand that rank and tradition have shaped how many of you view the world, but I did not choose this bond through calculation or convenience. Fate chose it, the same fate that has guided every Alpha King before me. Lyra Voss touched the crown of Valeth and was not burned. My wolf recognized her the instant I encountered her, a recognition that has not occurred with any other woman I have ever met. I will not dishonor that truth to satisfy the comfort of tradition." He turned to face Lyra directly, and though the entire court watched, his expression softened in a way that made her chest ache with an emotion she did not fully understand. "Whatever doubts remain in this room," Draven continued, "they end today. Lyra Voss is under my protection, claimed as my mate before this court and before the ancient laws that govern our bloodlines. Anyone who challenges that decision challenges me directly." The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the shuffling of uncertain feet and the quiet exchange of nervous glances among the nobles. General Aldrich's jaw remained tight with disapproval, though he said nothing further. Seraphine's expression had shifted into something colder, more calculating, though she too remained silent, her eyes fixed on Lyra with an intensity that made Lyra's skin crawl. An older woman finally stepped forward from the crowd, her robes marked with symbols that identified her as one of the castle's scholars. "Your Majesty," she said carefully, "if I may. The ancient texts regarding the crown speak of bloodline recognition, but they also speak of trials. If Lady Voss truly carries Valeth blood, there are traditional means of confirming it beyond the crown's initial reaction. Perhaps such confirmation would ease the concerns of the court, without requiring you to retract your claim." Draven considered this for a long moment, before nodding slowly. "What trials do the texts describe, Scholar Wren?" "The blood ritual," Wren said, "performed before the ancient altar in the eastern sanctuary. It has not been performed in generations, as there has been no need, but the texts are preserved in the royal archive. It would require several days to prepare properly." "Then we will prepare it," Draven said. "Lyra deserves the chance to have her lineage confirmed beyond doubt, for her own sake as much as for the court's." Lyra listened to this exchange with a strange, detached feeling, as though the conversation were happening around her, rather than about her. The idea that she might carry royal blood still felt impossible, a fantasy too large and strange to fit inside the life she had always known. But some small part of her, the part that had spent years wondering why she had never quite felt like she belonged among the Ashmore pack, could not entirely dismiss the possibility either. As the court began to disperse, the tension in the room easing slightly now that a plan had been established, Seraphine approached Lyra directly, her expression arranged into a mask of polite civility that did not quite reach her cold eyes. "How fortunate you are," Seraphine said quietly, her voice pitched low enough that only Lyra could hear. "Plucked from servitude by pure chance. I do hope, for your sake, that the blood ritual confirms what the king so desperately wants to believe. It would be a shame for you to become an embarrassment to this kingdom." "I never asked for any of this," Lyra said honestly, refusing to let the other woman's cold hostility shake her composure entirely. "And yet here you stand," Seraphine said, her smile thin and sharp, wearing a gown far finer than anything an Omega servant should ever touch. "Enjoy it while it lasts, Lyra Voss. Fortunes built on chance have a way of collapsing just as suddenly as they rise." With that, Seraphine turned and swept from the hall, her crimson gown trailing behind her like a warning. Lyra watched her go, an uneasy feeling settling into her stomach, though she forced herself to push it aside as Draven approached once more, his expression concerned. "What did she say to you?" he asked quietly. "Nothing important," Lyra said, though even she could hear the uncertainty in her own voice. Draven studied her for a moment, clearly not entirely convinced, but he did not press the matter further. "Come," he said instead, "you have not eaten this morning, and there is much I still need to explain to you before the ritual preparations begin." As they walked together from the great hall, Lyra could feel the weight of dozens of eyes still following her, some curious, some hostile, some simply uncertain. She did not know yet what the coming days would reveal about her past or her future. But for the first time since touching the crown, she allowed herself to wonder, quietly and carefully, whether the life she had always believed was hers to endure might instead become a life worth truly living. The days that followed passed in a strange blur for Lyra, caught somewhere between the exhaustion of her old life and the disorienting comfort of her new one. Mabel remained close by, gently guiding her through the unfamiliar rhythms of castle life, teaching her small things that noble-born women were simply expected to know, from the proper way to hold a formal conversation, to which fork belonged with which course, during dinner. Lyra absorbed it all quietly, grateful for the patience Mabel showed her, though the weight of constant scrutiny from the rest of the castle never fully lifted from her shoulders. Draven made a point of seeking her out each day, sometimes for only a few stolen minutes between his duties as king, sometimes for longer walks through the castle gardens, where the noise of court politics could not reach them. Lyra found herself, against every instinct honed by years of disappointment, beginning to look forward to those moments. "You seem different today," Draven observed one afternoon, as they walked together along a stone path lined with blooming flowers, the autumn air crisp but not yet cold. "Lighter, perhaps." "I slept without fear of being woken by someone demanding I work through exhaustion," Lyra admitted. "It has been a long time since I could say that." Something dark flickered across Draven's expression, and his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Tell me about Ashmore," he said. "Tell me what your life was like there." Lyra hesitated. She had spent years learning to keep her pain locked away, hidden beneath a careful mask of quiet obedience, because showing weakness to those who already viewed her as worthless only invited further cruelty. But something about the steady, patient way Draven watched her, waiting without pressuring, made her feel, for the first time, that perhaps her pain would not be used against her. "My parents died when I was very young," she began slowly. "An accident during a border patrol, though I was never told many details. The pack elders took me in only because tradition required it, not because anyone wanted me there. I grew up in the servants' quarters, doing whatever work I was assigned, and I learned quickly that complaining only made things worse." "Worse how?" Draven asked, his voice carefully controlled, though she could sense the tension building beneath his calm exterior. "There was a handler," Lyra continued, her voice quieter now. "Greta. She oversaw the Omega servants, and she made it very clear, every single day, that we existed only to serve, that our comfort or well-being mattered to no one. If we were too slow, or dropped something, or simply drew unwanted attention, we were punished. Not always with violence, though that happened too. Mostly with humiliation. Being denied meals. Being forced to sleep outside during winter months as a lesson in obedience. Draven had gone very still beside her, his hands clenched at his sides, and when he spoke again, his voice carried a barely restrained fury that made the air around them feel charged with tension. And no one intervened, no one protected you. There was no one to protect me, Lyra said simply. That is simply how life was for Omegas in Ashmore. I stopped expecting kindness a long time ago. That will never happen to you again, Draven said, his voice low and absolute. I promise you that. Lyra looked up at him, searching his face for any hint of empty reassurance, but found only sincere, burning conviction. You cannot promise things like that, she said gently. The world is not so easily changed. Perhaps not the entire world, Draven admitted, but within these walls, within my reach, I promise you this much. No one will ever again treat you as though your worth is determined by a title assigned to you at birth. He paused, then added quietly, I intend to send envoys to Ashmore to investigate this Greta and the conditions of the Omega servants there. What you have described is not merely unkind. It borders on cruelty that should not be tolerated in any pack under alliance with this kingdom. Lyra felt something unfamiliar stir in her chest at his words, a fragile warmth that she did not yet know how to name. For years, she had believed no one would ever care enough to seek justice on her behalf, let alone on behalf of the countless other Omegas still suffering under similar treatment. Thank you, she said quietly, the words feeling inadequate for the magnitude of what he had offered. They continued walking in comfortable silence for a while, the tension of the previous conversation slowly easing into something calmer. As they rounded a corner in the garden path, they came upon Scholar Wren, seated on a stone bench with several ancient books spread open around her, clearly deep in research. Your Majesty, Lady Voss, Wren said, rising quickly and offering a respectful bow. I am glad to have encountered you both. I have been reviewing the texts regarding the blood ritual, and I believe we will be ready to proceed within 3 days. So soon, Lyra said, surprised. The preparations are extensive but not lengthy, provided the necessary components are gathered correctly, Wren explained. The ritual requires performing the ceremony beneath a specific alignment of moonlight, which occurs again in 3 nights. If we miss this window, we would need to wait nearly a month for the next opportunity. Draven glanced at Lyra, clearly gauging her reaction. Are you prepared for this? Lyra considered the question honestly. Part of her feared what the ritual might reveal, feared confirming that she truly was nothing more than an ordinary servant who had stumbled into extraordinary circumstances through sheer luck, only to lose everything again once the truth was known. But another part of her, growing stronger each day she spent within the walls of Blackthorn Castle, wanted desperately to know the truth about who she truly was. I am prepared, she said finally. Very good, Wren said, gathering her books with brisk efficiency. I will send word once the sanctuary has been properly prepared. In the meantime, Lady Voss, I would recommend rest and calm. The ritual can be taxing, both physically and emotionally, particularly for those uncertain of what truths it might reveal. As Wren departed, Draven turned back to Lyra, his expression thoughtful. Whatever the ritual reveals, he said quietly, know that it changes nothing about how I feel toward you. The bond my wolf recognized has nothing to do with bloodlines or titles. It exists simply because you are you. Lyra wanted to believe him completely, wanted to let go of the years of self-doubt that still whispered quietly in the back of her mind, telling her that surely, eventually, this fragile happiness would be taken from her the way everything good had always been taken before. But she found, standing there in the quiet garden with the King of Blackthorn watching her with such open sincerity, that perhaps, for the first time, she was beginning to believe him just a little. That evening, as Mabel helped her prepare for bed, Lyra found herself asking a question that had been quietly forming in her mind for days. Mabel, did you ever hear anything, in all your years serving this castle, about a lost bloodline surviving somewhere among the common packs? Anything that might explain how someone like me could carry royal blood without ever knowing it? Mabel paused in her work, her expression thoughtful. There were always rumors, dear, in the years after the Valith line fell. Some said members of the royal family scattered and hid among common folk to escape persecution during the wars that followed. Whether any truth exists behind those old stories, I could not say for certain. But strange things have a way of surfacing eventually, especially when fate decides it is time. Lyra lay awake long after Mabel had left, staring up at the ornate ceiling of her chamber, turning over every fragment of memory she had of her early childhood, searching for any clue her parents might have left behind about a truth they had perhaps deliberately hidden from her. She found nothing concrete, only vague impressions and half-remembered feelings, but the possibility, however uncertain, refused to leave her mind. 3 days, she thought as sleep finally began to claim her. In 3 days, she would finally know the truth. The eastern sanctuary of Blackthorn Castle had not been opened in over a decade, and as Lyra stepped through its heavy stone doors on the evening of the ritual, she understood immediately why it had remained sealed for so long. The chamber felt ancient, in a way that seemed to reach into her very bones, its walls carved with symbols that glowed faintly under the light of dozens of candles, arranged in careful patterns across the floor. A stone altar stood at the center of the room, positioned directly beneath an open oculus in the ceiling, through which the night sky was clearly visible, the moon already climbing toward the position Scholar Wren had described. Draven stood near the entrance, dressed in formal robes befitting the significance of the occasion, his expression carefully composed, though Lyra could sense the tension radiating from him nonetheless. Beside him stood Wren, along with several other scholars and a handful of trusted advisors. Though notably absent were General Aldrich and Lady Seraphine, both of whom had made their skepticism about the entire proceeding well known in the days leading up to tonight. "Are you ready?" Draven asked quietly, as Lyra approached the altar, her heart pounding, with a mixture of anticipation and fear. "As ready as I can be," Lyra admitted. Wren stepped forward, holding a small ceremonial blade, with a blade so thin, it seemed almost translucent in the candlelight. "The ritual is simple in its execution, though profound in its purpose," she explained. "A single drop of your blood will be placed upon the altar stone, which has been carved from the same ancient quarry that produced the crown itself. If you carry true Valeth blood, the stone will react, revealing markings that have remained hidden since the fall of that bloodline centuries ago. If you do not carry that blood, nothing will happen at all." Lyra nodded, extending her hand as Wren approached. The blade was cold against her palm, a small, precise cut that stung only briefly before a single bead of blood welled up along her skin. Wren guided her hand forward, allowing the drop to fall onto the center of the altar stone. For a long, tense moment, nothing happened at all. Lyra felt her heart sink, a familiar, hollow disappointment settling into her chest. The same disappointment she had carried through so many years of being told she was worth nothing. She had almost convinced herself, over the past 3 days, that perhaps this time would be different, that perhaps she truly did belong to something greater than the life she had always known. The silence, stretching through the chamber, felt like confirmation of every doubt she had ever carried about her own worth. Then, slowly, the drop of blood began to spread across the altar stone, far beyond what a single drop should naturally cover, tracing intricate patterns across the surface that mirrored the symbols carved into the crown itself. The stone began to glow, faint at first, then brighter, until the entire altar radiated the same golden light Lyra remembered from her first encounter with the crown. Gasps echoed through the chamber, as the assembled scholars and advisors watched in stunned silence. Wren stepped closer to the altar, her expression a mixture of awe and disbelief as she examined the glowing patterns now clearly visible across the stone surface. "It cannot be," Wren murmured, tracing the patterns with careful fingers, though she did not touch the light itself. "These markings, this specific configuration, this is the royal seal of the Valeth line, unaltered and complete. I have only ever seen fragments of this pattern in the oldest historical records." She looked up at Lyra with wide eyes. "Lady Voss, you are not merely descended from the Valeth bloodline. This seal indicates a direct, unbroken lineage. You may well be the closest living heir to that throne that has existed in over 2 centuries. The chamber erupted into hushed, urgent conversation among the gathered scholars and advisors, though Lyra barely heard any of it, her attention fixed entirely on the glowing altar before her, the physical proof of a truth she had never dared to fully believe. Draven moved to stand beside her, his expression a complex mixture of triumph and something softer, something that looked almost like relief. "You see now," he said quietly, for her ears alone. "The crown did not make a mistake. I do not understand how this is possible, Lyra whispered, still staring at the glowing seal. My parents were simple pack servants. There was never any indication, any hint at all, that we carried royal blood. Bloodlines can remain hidden for generations, especially when survival depends on concealment, Ren explained, stepping back from the altar as its glow began to slowly fade. It is entirely possible your ancestors deliberately hid their heritage to escape persecution during the wars that followed the fall of the Valeth throne. Your parents may not have even known the truth themselves, if the secret was buried deeply enough within your family history. Lyra tried to process this information, tried to reconcile the image of her humble, quiet parents with the possibility that they had descended from ancient royalty, but the pieces refused to fit together easily within her mind. She had spent her entire life believing she was nothing, worthless, discarded, and now, in the span of a single week, she had discovered she might be among the most significant bloodlines remaining in the entire kingdom. What does this mean? Lyra finally asked, looking between Ren and Draven. For the crown? For the throne? For everything? It means, Draven said slowly, that you are not simply my claimed mate by fate alone. By ancient law, as a confirmed heir of the Valeth bloodline, you hold rightful claim to co-rule this kingdom alongside me, should you choose to accept that responsibility. The weight of his words settled over Lyra like a physical force, and she found herself struggling to breathe normally as the full implications began to take shape in her mind. Days ago, she had been nothing more than a discarded Omega servant, invisible and disposable in the eyes of everyone around her. Now she stood at the center of an ancient prophecy, potentially destined to rule alongside the most powerful king in the region. I do not know if I am ready for such responsibility, Lyra admitted honestly, her voice barely above a whisper. No one expects you to be ready immediately, Ren said kindly. This knowledge will take time to fully understand and accept. But know this, Lady Voss. Whatever uncertainty you feel now, the blood does not lie. You belong to this bloodline, as surely as the moon belongs to the night sky. As the ritual concluded and the gathered scholars and advisors began filing out of the sanctuary, still murmuring excitedly among themselves about the historic significance of what they had witnessed, Draven remained behind with Lyra, the chamber slowly emptying, until only the two of them remained beneath the fading glow of the altar. Come, Draven said gently, extending his hand toward her. You have had an overwhelming evening. Let me walk you back to your chamber. Lyra took his hand, grateful for his steady presence, as they made their way through the quiet castle corridors, the weight of everything she had just learned still settling heavily upon her shoulders. As they walked, she found herself studying his profile in the dim torchlight, searching for any sign of hesitation or doubt now that her royal heritage had been confirmed, wondering if perhaps this revelation had somehow changed the nature of the bond between them. You seem troubled, Draven observed, noticing her scrutiny. I am wondering, Lyra admitted slowly, whether this changes things between us, whether you would have felt the same connection to me if I truly had been nothing more than an ordinary Omega servant, with no royal blood at all. Draven stopped walking and turned to face her fully, his expression serious. The bond my wolf recognized had nothing to do with bloodlines, Lyra. I told you this before, and I meant it. I would have claimed you exactly the same way, whether the ritual tonight had revealed royal blood or nothing at all. This discovery does not change how I feel about you. It only changes what the rest of the kingdom will now be forced to accept. Lyra felt tears prick unexpectedly at the corners of her eyes, a rush of emotion she had not fully anticipated. For years, she had believed her worth was tied entirely to her usefulness, to how well she could serve others without complaint. The idea that someone could value her simply for who she was, regardless of rank or bloodline, still felt almost too foreign to fully accept. Thank you, she said quietly, for seeing me before you knew any of this. Draven reached up, gently brushing away a single tear that had escaped down her cheek, his touch tender in a way that contradicted everything the rest of the kingdom believed about their ruthless Alpha King. I will always see you, Lyra Voss, he said softly. Whatever comes next, whatever challenges this discovery brings, know that you do not face any of it alone. As they resumed their walk through the quiet castle, Lyra allowed herself, for the first time since arriving at Blackthorn, to imagine a future built not on survival and endurance, but on genuine belonging. Yet even as hope began to take root within her heart, A quiet unease lingered at the edges of her mind, a nagging awareness that not everyone within these castle walls would celebrate her newfound identity. Somewhere in the shadows of the court, she suspected, plans were already forming to ensure her rise did not go unchallenged. News of the ritual's outcome spread through Blackthorn Castle within hours, and by the following morning, the entire kingdom seemed to know that the servant girl claimed by their king had been confirmed as the last living heir of the Vaylith bloodline. Lyra felt the shift immediately in how people treated her, the servants who once ignored her now offering deep bows, the nobles who once sneered now watching her with calculating, careful eyes, uncertain how to navigate this unprecedented change in the court's hierarchy. Not everyone, however, greeted the news with celebration. Lyra noticed the way General Aldrich's expression darkened whenever her name was mentioned in council meetings, the way Lady Seraphine's polite smiles never quite reached her cold blue eyes during formal gatherings. She tried not to dwell on their disapproval, focusing instead on the small comforts of her new life, the quiet mornings spent walking through the castle gardens with Draven, the gentle lessons Mabel continued to offer about court customs and history. But the past, Lyra was learning, rarely stayed buried for long. It was nearly 2 weeks after the ritual, when Draven summoned her to his private study, his expression grave in a way that immediately set her nerves on edge. She found him standing near the window, staring out at the courtyard below, a folded letter, clutched tightly in one hand. "What is it?" she asked, closing the door quietly behind her. Draven turned to face her, and for a moment, she saw something in his expression she had not witnessed before, a barely contained fury that seemed to radiate from every line of his tense posture. "I sent envoys to Ashmore, as I promised you I would," he said, his voice tightly controlled. "They have returned with their findings." Lyra's stomach tightened with apprehension. "Tell me." "The conditions you described were not exaggerated," Draven said grimly. "If anything, they were understated. My envoys discovered evidence of systematic mistreatment among the Omega servants there, extending back many years. Denial of proper food and shelter, forced labor beyond reasonable limits, and punishments that crossed well beyond acceptable discipline into genuine cruelty." He paused, his jaw tightening further. "They also found records, Lyra. Records regarding your parents." Lyra's breath caught in her throat. "What records?" Draven crossed the room and gently took her hands in his, guiding her toward a chair near the fire before continuing. "Your parents were not killed in a simple border accident, as you were always told. According to hidden records my envoys uncovered, they were part of a small group within Ashmore, who had begun quietly investigating rumors of surviving Vaylith bloodlines among the common packs, likely searching for their own hidden heritage. When pack leadership discovered their research, they were deemed a threat to established order. Their deaths were arranged to look accidental." The room seemed to tilt around Lyra as she absorbed this information, years of assumed truth crumbling apart in an instant. "They were murdered," she whispered, "because they were getting close to discovering who I truly was." "Yes," Draven said quietly, his hands tightening gently around hers. "And afterward, the pack elders ensured you were raised in ignorance of your heritage, likely fearing what might happen if the truth ever surfaced. Your years of mistreatment were not simply cruelty born from prejudice against Omegas, Lyra. They were a deliberate effort to keep you small, invisible, and unaware of your own significance." Grief and fury warred within Lyra's chest, emotions so overwhelming she struggled to process them clearly. Every painful memory of her childhood, every cold meal denied, every night spent shivering in punishment, every cruel word from Greta and the other handlers, all of it had been part of a calculated effort to bury a truth someone had decided was too dangerous to allow her to discover. "I want justice," Lyra said finally, her voice steadier than she expected, though tears burned at the corners of her eyes. "Not just for my parents, for every Omega still suffering under that same cruelty in Ashmore." "You shall have it," Draven said, his voice hard with determination. "I have already dispatched a formal decree to the Ashmore Pack leadership, demanding immediate reform of their treatment toward Omega servants, under threat of severed alliance and economic consequence should they refuse. Additionally, I have ordered a full investigation into the deaths of your parents, with the intention of holding those responsible fully accountable, regardless of how much time has passed." "Thank you," Lyra whispered, though the words felt insufficient for the depth of gratitude and relief flooding through her. Draven reached up, gently wiping away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. "You do not need to thank me for seeking justice on behalf of the people I am sworn to protect," he said softly. "But I understand this news is difficult to process. Take whatever time you need." Over the following days, Lyra found herself grappling with complicated grief, mourning parents whose true story she had never known, while simultaneously beginning to understand her own life through an entirely new lens. Mabel became an invaluable source of comfort during this period, sitting with Lyra through long evenings, listening patiently as she worked through waves of anger, sorrow, and a strange, disorienting sense of validation. "You know," Mabel said one evening, as they sat together near the fire in Lyra's chamber, "your parents would be proud of the woman you have become, despite everything that was done to keep you small." "I do not feel proud," Lyra admitted quietly. "I feel angry that they were taken from me, angry that I spent my entire life believing I was worthless, when the truth was so different, angry that so many other Omegas are still suffering the same cruelty I endured." "Anger is not a weakness, dear," Mabel said gently. "It is only dangerous when it consumes you entirely, rather than fueling the change you wish to create. You have the power now, and the King's support, to ensure that no other Omega endures what you endured. Let that purpose guide your anger, rather than letting the anger control you." Lyra considered Mabel's words carefully, and over the following weeks, she found herself channeling her grief and fury into concrete action, working alongside Draven to establish new protections for Omega servants throughout Blackthorn's territories, protections that extended far beyond the borders of Ashmore itself. She visited the castle's own Omega servants personally, listening to their concerns, ensuring their treatment matched the standards she was determined to establish everywhere fate had given her influence. Draven watched this transformation with quiet pride, though Lyra noticed he had grown increasingly protective of her in the weeks following the revelation about her parents, rarely allowing her to travel anywhere within the castle without an escort, his usual composed demeanor occasionally slipping into sharp irritation whenever anyone questioned the legitimacy of her claim too aggressively. "You seem tense," Lyra observed one evening, as they walked together through the castle gardens beneath a canopy of stars. "I worry," Draven admitted, his expression troubled. "Those responsible for your parents' deaths acted to suppress the truth about your bloodline once already. Now that truth has been confirmed publicly, before the entire court. I do not know who else might view your existence as a threat worth eliminating." "You believe I am in danger," Lyra said, understanding dawning slowly. "I believe caution is warranted," Draven said carefully. "Ashmore's leadership has much to lose, now that their cruelty has been exposed and formal consequences threatened, and within this very castle, there are those who resent your rise far more than they have openly admitted." Lyra thought immediately of Seraphine, of the cold hostility barely concealed beneath the woman's polished courtesy, and a chill settled over her despite the warmth of the evening air. "You think Lady Seraphine might act against me?" Draven's expression darkened. "I do not know what Seraphine is capable of, but I have learned, through years of ruling this kingdom, that those who feel their ambitions threatened rarely accept defeat gracefully. I intend to ensure you remain protected, regardless of the source of any potential threat." As they continued their walk in thoughtful silence, Lyra found herself scanning the shadows of the garden with newfound wariness, the peaceful comfort she had begun to find within Blackthorn's walls, now tempered by an awareness that her enemies, whoever they might ultimately prove to be, were unlikely to remain passive for long. The formal coronation ceremony to recognize Lyra as co-ruler of Blackthorn had been scheduled for the following month, giving the kingdom time to prepare for what Scholar Wren described as the most significant royal event in over 2 centuries. Preparations consumed the castle entirely, from elaborate banquet planning to the careful drafting of new laws that would formally establish Lyra's authority alongside Draven's. Amid the flurry of preparation, Lyra continued her work, advocating for reform among the Omega servants, spending her mornings in council meetings and her afternoons personally overseeing improvements to the living conditions of castle staff. She found genuine purpose in this work, a sense of meaning that had been entirely absent from her life before, and slowly, cautiously, she allowed herself to believe that perhaps her difficult past had led her toward something worth the pain it had cost. It was during one such afternoon, while reviewing proposed reforms with a small council of advisors, that Lyra first noticed the odd behavior of a young servant named Pieter, a boy of perhaps 16, who worked closely within Seraphine's household staff. He lingered near the council chamber doors longer than necessary, his eyes darting nervously whenever Lyra's gaze happened to pass in his direction. She thought little of it initially, attributing his nervousness to simple shyness around the newly recognized heir to the throne. But over the following days, she noticed him again, and again, always positioned somewhere within observation distance whenever she moved through the castle, his presence subtle enough to avoid obvious suspicion, yet consistent enough that Lyra's instincts, honed by years of needing to anticipate danger, began to whisper warnings she could not entirely ignore. She mentioned her observations to Draven one evening, though she was careful to frame her concerns as mere curiosity rather than genuine alarm, not wanting to burden him unnecessarily if her instincts proved mistaken. "There is a boy," she said carefully, "who works within Lady Seraphine's household. I have noticed him near me quite often lately, more often than seems coincidental." Draven's expression sharpened immediately, all traces of relaxed evening conversation vanishing as his protective instincts engaged fully. "Describe him." Lyra provided what details she could recall, and Draven's jaw tightened as he listened, clearly already forming conclusions she had not yet allowed herself to fully consider. "I will have him watched," Draven said finally, discreetly, so as not to alert Seraphine that we have noticed anything unusual. "If she is indeed using him to monitor your movements, I want to understand her purpose before confronting her directly." Over the following week, Draven's personal guard, a quiet, capable man named Elric who Lyra had come to trust implicitly during her time at the castle, kept careful watch over young Peter's activities. What he discovered, when he finally reported back to Draven and Lyra together, in the privacy of the king's study, confirmed suspicions far darker than Lyra had initially anticipated. "The boy has been meeting regularly with an unknown contact outside the castle grounds," Elric reported, his expression grim. "Always at night, always in the same secluded location near the eastern forest boundary. I have not yet identified the contact's identity, as they take great care to remain hidden, but the pattern of these meetings began shortly after Lady Voss's heritage was confirmed." "What is being exchanged during these meetings?" Draven asked. "Documents, from what I could observe at a distance," Elric said. "Sealed correspondence, likely containing information gathered from within the castle itself." Draven's expression darkened further, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. "Seraphine is feeding information to someone outside these walls. We do not yet know for certain that Lady Seraphine is directly involved," Elric cautioned. "The boy works within her household, but that alone does not confirm her personal involvement in whatever scheme is unfolding." "Confirm it," Draven said, his voice hard with determination. "I want to know exactly who is receiving this information, and what purpose it serves, before we take any further action." As the days passed, Lyra found herself increasingly unable to shake the growing unease settling over her. The peaceful sense of belonging she had begun to cultivate, now tainted by the awareness of hidden schemes unfolding just beyond her perception. She threw herself further into her reform work, partly out of genuine dedication to the cause, and partly as a way to keep her mind from spiraling into anxious speculation about what dangers might be gathering against her. During one particularly difficult council session, discussing proposed changes to labor regulations across Blackthorn's territories, General Aldrich raised objections so pointed and persistent that Lyra began to wonder whether his opposition extended beyond simple traditionalist concerns. "These reforms will place undue financial burden on pack leadership throughout our alliance territories," Aldrich argued, his tone clipped with barely concealed frustration. "Lady Voss means well, I am certain, but her limited experience with matters of governance leads her to propose changes without fully considering their broader economic consequences." "I have consulted extensively with economic advisors regarding these proposals," Lyra countered, refusing to let his dismissive tone shake her composure. "The long-term benefits of improved worker treatment, including reduced turnover and increased productivity, have been well documented in the reports I have provided to this council." "With respect," Aldrich said, though his tone carried little genuine respect at all. "Reports, compiled by advisors, eager to please their new mistress, hardly constitute unbiased analysis." "General Aldrich," Draven interjected sharply, his patience clearly wearing thin. You will address Lady Voss with the respect befitting her position, or you will excuse yourself from this council entirely." Aldrich's jaw tightened, though he inclined his head in a stiff, reluctant show of deference. "My apologies, Your Majesty. I only wish to ensure our decisions serve the kingdom's best interests." The tension in the room remained palpable long after Aldrich fell silent, and Lyra found herself wondering, not for the first time, whether the general's resistance stemmed purely from traditionalist concerns, or whether he, too, might be involved in whatever quiet scheme Seraphine appeared to be orchestrating against her. That evening, as Lyra prepared for bed with Mabel's quiet assistance, she finally voiced the fear that had been building steadily within her over the preceding weeks. "I feel as though I am waiting for something terrible to happen," she admitted, staring at her own reflection in the mirror as Mabel gently brushed out her hair. "Every kindness I have found here feels fragile, as though it could be shattered at any moment by forces I cannot fully see or understand." Mabel's hands paused briefly in their work, her expression thoughtful in the mirror's reflection. "That fear is understandable, dear, given everything you have endured. But do not let it consume the joy you have found here. Whatever schemes may be unfolding in the shadows, you are not facing them alone this time. The king stands beside you, as do many others within this castle who have come to genuinely care for your well-being." Lyra nodded, though the reassurance did little to fully ease the tight knot of anxiety lodged in her chest. She thought of the coronation ceremony drawing steadily closer, of the public vulnerability it would expose her to, standing before the entire kingdom as a newly recognized heir, with enemies she had not yet fully identified. Later that night, unable to sleep despite her exhaustion, Lyra found herself wandering quietly through the castle's darkened corridors, drawn by restless energy she could not quite name. She had not intended to venture far, but her footsteps eventually led her past the entrance to Lady Seraphine's private wing, where she paused, noticing a faint light still glowing beneath the door of what she knew to be Seraphine's personal study. Voices drifted faintly through the door, too muffled to make out clear words, but the tense, urgent quality of the conversation was unmistakable, even through the barrier of solid wood. Lyra hesitated, torn between the instinct to retreat quietly back to her own chambers, and the growing conviction that whatever was being discussed within that room might hold answers to the questions that had been haunting her for weeks. Before she could decide, footsteps approached from within, and Lyra barely had time to duck into a shadowed alcove before the study door opened and a cloaked figure slipped out, moving quickly and silently down the corridor in the opposite direction, too far and too concealed for Lyra to identify clearly. Her heart pounding, Lyra remained hidden in the shadows for several long minutes after the figure disappeared, her mind racing through the implications of what she had just witnessed. Whatever Seraphine was planning, it was clearly far more advanced and far more dangerous than simple political maneuvering. She needed to tell Draven immediately. Draven listened with growing anger as Lyra recounted what she had witnessed, pacing the length of his study while she spoke, his amber eyes darkening with barely restrained fury. When she finished, he stopped pacing entirely and turned to face her, his expression grim. "This confirms what Elric has suspected for some time," he said. "Seraphine is orchestrating something against you, though we still lack clear evidence of her ultimate purpose. I will have the castle guard increase surveillance on her movements immediately, and I want additional protection assigned to you at all times, particularly as the coronation approaches. I do not want to live in constant fear within these walls," Lyra said, frustration coloring her voice. "I have spent enough of my life feeling small and threatened. I would rather confront whatever danger Seraphine poses, directly, than hide from it." "I understand that instinct," Draven said gently, though his tone remained firm. "But confronting an unknown threat without adequate preparation only invites unnecessary danger. Allow me to gather more information before we act. Patience now may prevent far greater harm later." Reluctantly, Lyra agreed, though the following days tested her patience considerably as she navigated increased security measures and the constant awareness of watchful guards positioned throughout her daily activities. The coronation preparations continued regardless, the castle staff working tirelessly to ensure every detail of the historic ceremony would proceed flawlessly. It was only 3 days before the scheduled coronation when Seraphine's scheme finally revealed itself, though not in the manner anyone had anticipated. Lyra had been reviewing final ceremony details with Scholar Wren in the castle library when a commotion erupted in the corridor outside, urgent voices and hurried footsteps drawing both women's attention toward the doorway. Moments later, General Aldrich burst into the library, flanked by several guards, his expression a mixture of triumph and grim satisfaction that immediately set Lyra's instincts on edge. "Lady Voss," Aldrich said, his voice carrying an authority she had not heard from him before. "You are to accompany us to the Great Hall, immediately. Serious allegations have been raised against you, and the king has convened an emergency council session to address them." "What allegations?" Lyra demanded, her heart beginning to race as confusion gave way rapidly to alarm. "You will learn the details in due course," Aldrich said, though something in his satisfied expression suggested he already knew precisely what those allegations entailed. "Please, do not resist. This will proceed far more smoothly if you cooperate." Wren rose immediately from her seat, her expression outraged. "This is highly irregular, General. Lady Voss deserves to know the nature of any accusations before being summoned so abruptly." "These matters concern the legitimacy of her bloodline claim," Aldrich said, his tone clipped. "Evidence has come to light, suggesting the ritual results may have been falsified." Lyra's stomach dropped with dread as she followed the guards toward the Great Hall, her mind racing through the implications of what Aldrich had just revealed. Falsified evidence could only mean one thing: that someone, likely Seraphine, had constructed a deliberate scheme to discredit her entirely, to unravel everything she had built over the preceding weeks, in a single, devastating accusation. The Great Hall was already crowded with nobles and advisors by the time Lyra arrived, their voices hushed but tense as they awaited the proceedings. Draven stood near his throne, his expression carved from granite, though Lyra could see the barely controlled fury simmering just beneath his composed exterior. Seraphine stood nearby, her expression arranged into careful concern that did not quite mask the satisfaction gleaming in her cold blue eyes. "What is happening?" Lyra asked quietly, as she took her place beside Draven, though she suspected she already understood the answer. "Lady Seraphine has presented evidence to the council," Draven said, his voice tight with restrained anger, "claiming the blood ritual that confirmed your Valeth heritage was manipulated through forbidden magic, rather than reflecting a genuine bloodline connection." "That is a lie," Lyra said immediately, though her voice trembled slightly with the injustice of the accusation. "I intend to prove exactly that," Draven said quietly, "but the council must be permitted to review the presented evidence formally, according to the traditions governing such serious allegations." Scholar Wren was summoned forward to examine the evidence Seraphine had presented, a collection of documents and testimony suggesting that certain rare herbs, capable of artificially triggering reactions similar to genuine bloodline recognition, had been discovered among Lyra's personal belongings shortly before the ritual took place. "These herbs were planted," Lyra said firmly, staring directly at Seraphine across the crowded hall. "I have never seen them before in my life." "A convenient claim," Seraphine said smoothly, her voice carrying easily through the silent chamber, "though I understand why you would deny such damning evidence. I only wish to protect the integrity of this kingdom's most sacred traditions, Your Majesty. Surely you can understand my concern." "Your concern," Draven said coldly, "conveniently surfaces only days before the coronation ceremony that would formally establish Lady Voss's authority. I find the timing highly suspicious, Lady Seraphine." "I understand how it appears," Seraphine said, maintaining her composed expression, despite the obvious tension building around her. "But I assure you, Your Majesty, my only motivation is loyalty to this kingdom and its traditions. Surely a full investigation, conducted properly before the coronation proceeds, would serve everyone's best interests, including Lady Voss's, should the accusations ultimately prove unfounded." Murmurs rippled through the assembled council, as several members nodded in cautious agreement with Seraphine's carefully framed suggestion. Lyra felt the ground shifting beneath her, the weeks of hard-won trust and belonging she had built within these walls suddenly threatened by fabricated evidence she had no immediate way to disprove. Wren, still examining the presented documents carefully, finally spoke up, her expression troubled. "Your Majesty, while I cannot immediately confirm or deny the authenticity of these particular herbs, I can state with certainty that even if such substances existed, they could not replicate the specific ancient seal pattern that appeared on the altar stone during the ritual. That particular configuration is documented only in the oldest historical records, records that would not be accessible to someone attempting to falsify such a result without extensive, specialized knowledge. Perhaps Lady Voss had assistance, Seraphine suggested smoothly, though a flicker of uncertainty crossed her expression for the first time. Someone with access to such records, motivated to elevate her position for their own purposes. The implication hung heavy in the room, and Lyra realized with growing horror that Seraphine was subtly suggesting Draven himself might have orchestrated the entire deception, a suggestion that would not only discredit Lyra, but potentially undermine the king's own authority and judgment before the assembled court. "Enough," Draven said, his voice carrying a dangerous edge that silenced the murmuring council immediately. "Lady Seraphine, you accuse me now of conspiring to deceive my own court? Choose your next words with extreme caution." Seraphine's composure finally cracked slightly, though she quickly recovered, offering a shallow, apologetic bow. "Forgive me, Your Majesty. I misspoke in my concern for the kingdom's integrity. I only meant to suggest that a thorough investigation would clear any doubt entirely, protecting both Lady Voss's legitimate claim and the credibility of this court." Draven studied her for a long, tense moment, his amber eyes narrowed with suspicion that made even Lyra's skin prickle with unease. "Very well," he said finally. "A formal investigation will proceed, conducted by neutral scholars from outside this court, to eliminate any possibility of bias in either direction. The coronation will be postponed until the investigation concludes." A wave of disappointment crashed through Lyra at this announcement, though she understood the necessity of the decision even as it stung deeply. Seraphine, for her part, maintained a carefully neutral expression, though Lyra could see the faint satisfaction lingering at the corners of her mouth, the quiet triumph of someone who had successfully delayed, if not entirely derailed, everything Lyra had worked toward. As the council session concluded and the hall slowly emptied, Lyra remained standing near the throne, staring after Seraphine's retreating figure, with a growing certainty that this accusation was only the opening move in a far more elaborate scheme. "She is not finished," Lyra murmured, more to herself than to Draven. "No," Draven agreed grimly, his hand finding hers and holding it firmly. "But neither are we. Whatever Seraphine is planning, we will uncover the truth behind it, and when we do, she will answer for every lie she has told before this court." The investigation into Seraphine's allegations proceeded over the following 2 weeks, and Lyra found the waiting almost unbearable. The fragile peace she had built within Blackthorn's walls, now clouded by uncertainty and the watchful, calculating eyes of a court divided in its loyalties. Neutral scholars arrived from distant territories to review the evidence impartially, examining the presented herbs, cross-referencing ancient texts, and interviewing everyone who had been present during the original ritual. Throughout this tense period, Elric's continued surveillance of Seraphine and young Peter finally began yielding concrete results. The mysterious contact meeting the boy near the eastern forest boundary was eventually identified as a representative from a rival kingdom to the north, a territory that had long resented Blackthorn's dominance among the Five Packs and had reportedly been seeking any opportunity to destabilize Draven's rule. Lady Seraphine has been in regular correspondence with agents from the Northern Reach for several months, Elric reported during a private meeting with Draven and Lyra, laying out carefully documented evidence he had gathered. It appears her family holds significant financial interests tied to Northern Reach trade agreements, interests that would be substantially strengthened were Blackthorn's current leadership destabilized or discredited. She sought to undermine my claim not merely from personal jealousy, Lyra realized slowly, but as part of a larger scheme to weaken Blackthorn's alliance and benefit her family's foreign business interests. "It appears so," Elric confirmed. "The herbs presented as evidence against you were most likely supplied by her Northern Reach contacts, along with detailed instructions on how to stage the accusation convincingly before the council." Draven's expression had grown increasingly thunderous throughout Elric's report, his hands clenched tightly at his sides. "She has committed treason against this kingdom," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Not merely personal betrayal against Lyra. We will need irrefutable proof before making any public accusation of this magnitude," Elric cautioned. "Lady Seraphine holds significant standing among the nobility. An unsupported accusation could fracture the court's loyalty even further." "Then we will obtain irrefutable proof," Draven said firmly. The opportunity arrived sooner than anyone anticipated. Scholar Wren, continuing her examination of the ritual evidence, made a breakthrough discovery, while cross-referencing ancient historical texts, with the specific herb samples presented against Lyra. These particular herbs, Wren announced during an emergency meeting called with the neutral investigating scholars, while capable of producing a superficial golden glow when applied to certain stone surfaces, cannot replicate the specific ancient seal pattern that appeared during Lady Voss's ritual. I have confirmed this through careful experimentation. The herbs produce only a generalized shimmer, entirely distinct from the precise, historically documented Valith seal configuration. The neutral scholars examined Wren's findings carefully, testing her conclusions independently, before finally reaching consensus among themselves. Their formal ruling, presented before an emergency council session convened specifically for the announcement, confirmed unequivocally that Lyra's original ritual results had been entirely genuine, and that the herbs presented as evidence against her could not have produced the specific results documented that night. Furthermore, the lead investigating scholar announced, "We have discovered that the specific batch of herbs presented as evidence was sourced from suppliers connected to trade routes controlled by the Northern Reach, rather than any source available to Lady Voss during her time as an Ashmore servant." Gasps and urgent whispers rippled through the assembled council as the implications became clear. Every eye in the hall slowly turned toward Seraphine, who stood rigid near the edge of the gathering, her carefully maintained composure finally beginning to crack under the mounting weight of exposed evidence. Draven rose from his throne, his expression carved from cold fury, as he addressed the assembled court directly. "Lady Seraphine," he said, his voice carrying easily through the tense silence, "you stand accused of conspiring with agents of the Northern Reach to fabricate evidence against Lady Voss, with the intent of destabilizing this kingdom's leadership for personal and foreign financial gain. How do you answer these charges?" Seraphine's composure finally shattered entirely, her expression twisting between desperate denial and cornered panic. "This is absurd," she said, though her voice trembled with obvious distress. "I acted only out of loyalty to this kingdom's traditions, nothing more." "Then explain," Draven said coldly. "The correspondence discovered between your household and Northern Reach agents, correspondence detailing the exact scheme presented against Lady Voss before this council." Seraphine's eyes darted frantically around the hall, searching for any ally among the assembled nobility, but found only shocked, judgmental stares in return. General Aldrich, who had supported her accusations most vocally, now stepped back from her visibly, his own expression a mixture of betrayal and fury at having been used as an unwitting instrument in her scheme. "You used me," Aldrich said, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. "You knew my traditionalist concerns would lend credibility to your fabricated accusations." "I did what was necessary," Seraphine finally admitted, her voice hardening with desperate defiance, now that denial had become impossible. "This kingdom has grown weak, clinging to outdated notions of fated bonds and ancient bloodlines, while stronger alliances with the Northern Reach could have secured our prosperity for generations. An Omega servant, elevated to co-ruler, through nothing but chance and superstition, threatens everything this kingdom could become." "You conspired with a foreign power against your own king," Draven said, his voice deadly quiet. "To satisfy your own ambitions and prejudices. That is treason, Lady Seraphine, and it will be answered according to the full weight of Blackthorn's law." Guards moved forward at Draven's signal, and Seraphine's desperate composure finally crumbled entirely as they escorted her from the hall, her protests growing increasingly frantic as the reality of her situation set in fully. The assembled court watched in stunned silence, the weight of what had just transpired settling heavily over the gathered nobility. Lyra remained standing beside Draven throughout the confrontation, a complex swirl of emotions moving through her, relief at her vindication, mixed with a strange, unexpected sadness at witnessing someone's ambitions and prejudices lead them toward such devastating ruin. She had not wished harm upon Seraphine, only truth and justice, and now that both had been achieved, the victory felt more solemn than triumphant. "It is finished," Draven said quietly, turning to face her once the hall had begun to empty, the shocked murmurs of the departing nobility slowly fading into the distance. "Is it?" Lyra asked softly. "Or is this only the beginning of proving myself worthy?" again and again, to a court that may never fully accept me." Draven's expression softened, and he reached out to gently cup her face in his hands. "You have already proven yourself worthy, Lyra, not through bloodline or ritual, but through your own strength, compassion, and resilience. Those who witnessed today's proceedings understand now what I have known since the moment I first saw you. You belong here, exactly as you are." Lyra allowed herself to lean into his touch, the exhaustion of the preceding weeks finally beginning to ease from her shoulders. Outside the great hall's tall windows, evening light spilled golden across the courtyard, and somewhere within the castle's ancient stone walls, the crown of Valeth continued its quiet, steady glow, as though satisfied that the truth it had revealed weeks earlier had finally been fully vindicated before the entire kingdom. The rescheduled coronation arrived on a clear autumn morning, the sky above Blackthorn Castle, a brilliant, cloudless blue that seemed, to Lyra, like a quiet blessing after weeks of turmoil and uncertainty. She stood in her private chamber as Mabel made final adjustments to her ceremonial gown, a deep sapphire blue, embroidered with delicate gold thread, that traced patterns eerily similar to those carved into the ancient crown itself. "You look every bit the queen you are about to become," Mabel said softly, stepping back to admire her work, her eyes glistening with unshed tears of pride. "I still find it difficult to believe this is truly happening," Lyra admitted, studying her reflection in the tall mirror before her. The woman staring back at her bore little resemblance to the exhausted, invisible servant who had once carried trays through crowded halls, careful never to draw unwanted attention. Yet beneath the elegant gown and carefully styled hair, she knew the same resilient spirit remained, tempered but not erased by everything she had endured. "Believe it, dear," Mabel said firmly. "You have earned this moment through your own strength, not merely through fate's intervention. Never forget that distinction." A soft knock interrupted them, and Draven entered, dressed in formal ceremonial robes befitting the significance of the day, his amber eyes warming immediately as they found her across the room. Mabel offered a respectful curtsy before quietly excusing herself, leaving the two of them alone in the firelit chamber. "You are breathtaking," Draven said quietly, closing the distance between them. "I am terrified," Lyra admitted honestly, though a small smile tugged at the corners of her mouth despite her nervousness. "That is understandable," Draven said gently, taking her hands in his. "But you do not face this moment alone. Whatever fears linger, know that I stand beside you, as I always have since the moment you touched that crown." News of Seraphine's fate had spread through the kingdom in the weeks following her exposure and trial, her treason resulting in permanent exile from Blackthorn's territories, her family's assets and trade privileges stripped entirely as consequence for her betrayal. General Aldrich, though embarrassed by his unwitting role in the scheme, had ultimately proven his loyalty through the sincerity of his ongoing support for Lyra's reforms, his traditionalist concerns gradually softening as he witnessed the genuine positive impact her policies produced throughout the kingdom's territories. Ashmore Pack, faced with the threat of severed alliance and mounting external pressure, had implemented significant reforms regarding the treatment of Omega servants, with Greta and several other handlers formally removed from their positions following the investigation into decades of documented mistreatment. It was not complete justice, Lyra knew, for the years of suffering she and countless others had endured, but it represented meaningful progress toward a future where such cruelty would no longer be tolerated. As Draven led her from her chamber and through the castle corridors toward the great hall, Lyra found her earlier nervousness gradually settling into a quiet, steady confidence. The servants and guards they passed along the way offered genuine, warm smiles, rather than the wary, calculating glances she had grown accustomed to during her early days at Blackthorn, a small but meaningful sign of how far she had come. The great hall had been transformed for the occasion, elaborate banners bearing both the Black Wolf sigil of Blackthorn and, newly incorporated, the ancient symbols of the Valeth bloodline hanging together in careful harmony along the vaulted ceiling. Nobles, envoys from allied territories, and representatives from packs throughout the region filled the hall to capacity, their voices hushed with anticipation as Lyra and Draven entered together. Scholar Wren stood ready near the ancient crown, now displayed prominently upon a raised dais at the center of the hall, its golden light pulsing gently, as though eager to complete the purpose it had waited centuries to fulfill. As Lyra approached, The assembled crowd fell into complete, reverent silence. "Today," Ren announced, her voice carrying clearly through the vast chamber, "we witness the restoration of an ancient bloodline, long thought lost to history. Lyra Voss, confirmed heir of the Valith line, through both ancient ritual and the judgment of impartial scholars, steps forward now to claim her rightful place beside King Draven Ashgrave, uniting two powerful lineages in a bond recognized by fate itself." Lyra ascended the dais slowly, her heart pounding, though her steps remained steady and sure. She knelt before the crown, as Ren had instructed during their preparations, and as her fingers closed around it for the second time, the golden light that had once frightened her with its unknown power now felt instead like an old, familiar embrace. She lifted the crown and placed it upon her own head, and the entire hall erupted in brilliant golden light, the ancient magic long dormant within the crown finally awakening fully now that its true heir had claimed it before the assembled kingdom. Gasps of wonder rippled through the crowd as the light gradually settled, leaving Lyra standing radiant at the center of the hall, no longer the discarded, invisible Omega she had once been, but a queen fully recognized and embraced by fate, bloodline, and the kingdom she now stood ready to serve. Draven joined her upon the dais, taking her hand in his as he turned to address the assembled court. "Let it be known throughout every territory allied with Blackthorn," he announced, his voice carrying the full authority of his position, "that Queen Lyra Voss stands beside me as equal ruler of this kingdom, her judgment and leadership recognized, not merely through ancient bloodline, but through her own demonstrated strength, compassion, and unwavering commitment to justice. Together, we will lead Blackthorn into an era defined not by rigid tradition alone, but by genuine fairness and protection for all who call this kingdom home, regardless of rank or birth." The hall erupted into thunderous applause, nobles and commoners alike rising to their feet in genuine celebration of the historic moment unfolding before them. Lyra scanned the joyful faces filling the chamber, remembering with quiet clarity the years she had spent believing herself invisible, worthless, undeserving of even basic kindness. That painful history remained a part of her, she understood now, not something to be erased or forgotten, but rather the very foundation from which her strength and compassion had grown. As the celebration continued late into the evening, Draven found a quiet moment to steal Lyra away from the festivities, leading her out onto a private balcony overlooking the castle grounds, where the autumn night air carried the sweet scent of blooming flowers from the gardens below. "How do you feel?" he asked softly, wrapping his arms gently around her, as they gazed out over the peaceful kingdom spread before them. "Grateful," Lyra said honestly, leaning into his warmth. "Grateful for the crown that chose me, for the bond that brought us together, and for every difficult step that led me to this moment. I would not change any of it, even the pain, because it shaped me into the woman standing here beside you now." Draven pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead, his expression filled with quiet devotion. "I promise you, Lyra Voss, that whatever challenges the future may bring, we will face them together, as true equals, bound not merely by fate, but by genuine love, earned through trust, respect, and unwavering loyalty." Below them, the lights of Blackthorn Castle glowed warmly against the darkening sky, a kingdom transformed not through conquest or cruelty, but through the quiet, powerful truth that worth was never determined by rank or circumstance, but by the strength carried within one's own heart. And as Lyra stood there, finally home in every sense of the word, she understood that her story, once defined entirely by loss and endurance, had become instead a story of resilience, justice, and a love that had recognized her true worth from the very first moment their paths had crossed.